Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to explore with you a novice researcher's comparative guide to hermeneutic phenomenology and narrative phenomenology. My name is Lindy Sherring and I'm a provisional PhD candidate at CQ University. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I stand today, the land of the Wadi people, the custodians of which we learn, grow and live. We recognise a continuing connection to the land, water and community. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Before we get stuck into the real-world application of each methodology, let me briefly explain what phenomenology is. Let me start with a simple question. What is music? If your answer is based on rhythms, cadence and beats, you have expressed an empirical perspective. However, if you say music evokes memories and emotions, you've just expressed a phenomenological perspective. In essence, phenomenology studies human consciousness, focusing on our subjective experiences rather than objective truths. The philosophical movement of phenomenology flourished in the early 20th century, led by a German philosopher and mathematician, Edmund Husserl. Husserl believed that natural science couldn't fully explain human subjective consciousness. That is why we feel and act the way we do. Natural scientists often focus on objective aspects like our nervous system and biological makeup to understand behaviour and perception. That is what we now call neuroscience. Husserl, however, argued that this approach couldn't capture the full complexity of our experiences. For instance, Husserl was interested in understanding why we feel and act as we do in different situations. He termed this lived experience, which can only be studied within the flow of everyday life and not in controlled lab settings. Phenomenology can thus be applied to research in healthcare, psychology, sociology, education, and other subjective disciplines. An example that we will walk through together and that maybe you can relate to is the lived experience of a PhD student's struggle with imposter syndrome. But first, let me introduce a short history of phenomenology and how hermeneutic phenomenology and later narrative phenomenology came about. There are two primary approaches in phenomenology. The first is Husserl's transcendental phenomenology, which involves studying phenomena as if from an outsider's perspective, free from preconceptions. This is done by bracketing the researcher's biases and preconceptions to view the phenomenon objectively. As Husserl himself explained, transcendental phenomenology is the objective study of human subjectivity. The second is hermeneutic phenomenology, developed by Husserl's student Martin Heidegger, which involves interpreting texts and acknowledging the researcher's own experiences. Hermeneutic phenomenologists read narrative data from participants, engage in reflective writing, and reinterpret the text to construct an understanding of lived experiences. Unlike Husserl's approach, hermeneutic phenomenology values the researcher's subjective insights as part of the analysis. Despite differences in approaches, phenomenologists share common assumptions. Human consciousness is central, and subjectivity and objectivity are interconnected. They believe cultural context shapes human experience and that understanding these experiences can reveal insights into motivations and actions. That is, culture is both a product and a co-creator of human experience. Narrative phenomenology is another approach within phenomenological research. It emphasises the stories and personal accounts of individuals to explore their lived experiences. By focusing on narratives, researchers can uncover the meanings people ascribe to their experiences and how they construct their realities. Using narrative phenomenology, researchers can gather rich, detailed information about personal and cultural contexts, emotional responses, and individual perspectives. This approach helps in understanding how people make sense of their lives, their identity, and their relationships with others. It is particularly useful in fields like psychology, education, and healthcare, where personal stories and experiences are crucial for gaining deeper insights into human behaviour and social interactions. For example, narrative phenomenology can reveal how patients experience illness and treatment, or how students perceive their learning environments. By interpreting these narratives, researchers can gain a nuanced understanding of the complexities of human experience, going beyond mere statistical data to capture the essence of what it means to live through various phenomena. Narrative phenomenology delves into the stories people tell about their lives, recognizing that these stories are deeply embedded in our culture. Humans use storytelling to make sense of their experiences, shaping and reshaping their understanding of the world and themselves. Through narratives, individuals construct their identities, connect with others, and interpret their lived experiences. When used as a research methodology, narrative phenomenology provides insights into how personal and collective stories influence and reflect our realities. Researchers can explore how cultural narratives shape individual experiences and how personal stories contribute to cultural understanding. This approach helps uncover the layers of meaning in people's lives, revealing how they navigate their experiences, make decisions, and form beliefs. For instance, in healthcare, narrative phenomenology can uncover how patients interpret their illness and treatment, influencing their healing process. In education, it can reveal how students perceive their learning journeys and the impact of their educational experiences on their future aspirations. By capturing these stories, researchers gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of human experiences and the interplay between individual and cultural narratives. Narrative phenomenology thus enriches our understanding of human consciousness by emphasizing the significance of stories in shaping our perceptions and interactions with the world. If you're used to empirical research, you might find phenomenology's focus on subjective experiences and qualitative data a new and valuable perspective. Both empirical and phenomenological approaches have their place depending on the research goals. We're going to look at the comparative analysis of the two now, with the hermeneutic phenomenology in the blue and the narrative phenomenology in the red. We're going to look at the different aspects of the two methodologies. Firstly, we're going to look at the interpretive depth of hermeneutic phenomenology versus the narrative construction of narrative phenomenology. Hermeneutic phenomenology delves into the existential and philosophical meanings behind experiences, where narrative phenomenology focuses on the structure and storytelling aspect of the participants' experiences. With data interpretation versus storytelling, hermeneutic has a deep interpretation of themes such as existential anxiety, identity crisis, and isolation. Where narrative has a storytelling component, we look at the narrative elements like plot and characters and metaphors. Thematic focus versus temporal sequence. Hermeneutic uses the participants' descriptions of their experiences and looks to interpret the meanings behind the descriptions to develop themes. Where narrative phenomenology looks at the flow of events, the narrative tone, and the resolution of conflict. The philosophical concepts versus the narrative devices. The hermeneutic philosophical reflections come out through Heidegger, satire, and Kierkegaard. The narrative techniques of narrative phenomenology lie in the metaphors, plot, and plot development. Next, we're going to have a look at the dynamic identity formation. So hermeneutic phenomenology examines how identity is continuously shaped and reshaped through lived experiences and their interpretation. This is called the hermeneutic circle. Simply, the hermeneutic circle is the idea that to understand something, you need to look at both the big picture and the smaller details, and each helps make sense of the other. This back and forth process helps deepen the overall understanding. Hermeneutic phenomenology examines the identity as shaped by deep, ongoing interpretation of lived experiences. Identity is seen as fluid, formed through existential crises and resolutions. Narrative phenomenology emphasises how identity is constructed and conveyed through storytelling, highlighting the temporal and contextual nature of identity. Narrative phenomenology views identity as it's constructed through storytelling, with each narrative contributing to the evolving self-concept. Identities are dynamic, influenced by the context and the ways stories are told and retold. Now we'll look at the slight differences in meaning making between the two methodology types. Hermeneutic phenomenology delves into how individuals make sense of their experiences and the underlying meanings. It engages in deep interpretation of experiences, seeking to uncover existential meanings and philosophical insights. It's about understanding the why behind feelings and experiences. Where narrative phenomenology focuses on how individuals make meaning through the narratives they create. It's about understanding the how and what of storytelling. Hermeneutic has a deep interpretive aspect. This methodology emphasises the philosophical interpretations of the meanings behind experiences. Where narrative phenomenology emphasises the role of narrative in fostering empathy and awareness, both for the narrator and the listener or reader. To explain this best, we will embark on a mini research together, titled The Lived Experience of Imposter Syndrome in PhD Candidates. This topic may be something that you can relate to. For the sake of time, we will use the same interview data for each analysis, first using hermeneutic phenomenology and then using narrative phenomenology. I would note here though that depending on the chosen methodology, the interview questions might vary slightly. The primary interview question used for our mini study today will be, tell me about your PhD journey from the beginning through to now, and the follow-up questions will be based on our participants' responses. A little bit of background, our participant's name is David and he's currently completing his PhD in the medical science field through Sydney University. Hi David, thanks for having a chat with me today about your PhD journey. I've just got a couple of questions. Just feel free to elaborate as much as you like. Okay. So my first question is just to tell me a little bit about your PhD journey from the beginning, from when you were first enrolled through to now at the completion of it.
Well, thank you. The beginning, the enrolment, I was on cloud nine, just very excited to have the opportunity to undertake the study. I thought I had a good project in mind, and obviously it was supported by my supervisors. But it all came crashing down pretty quickly within the first couple of weeks. Became overwhelmed with the knowledge of the people around me. I read through a couple of PhDs at the suggestion of my supervisors, and I started to panic. I didn't think I'd ever be able to produce work like that. And talking to my supervisors, the grasp of research and the literature and just everything was just off the charts. took time to stop feeling so overwhelmed. It was just a matter of getting my head down and working through the process. And I think one of the things I was told was a PhD is about learning how to research, and no one knows how to do that without going through this process. And looking back now, I can see that sense of panic and being overwhelmed and a fear of failure, being the imposter, is pretty common. But with good support and consistent effort throughout the time, it is possible to pop out the other side and achieve what you set out to do, which is a great feeling.
So tell me a little bit more about your those feelings of being overwhelmed. Can you think of a particular moment where those feelings really overcame you? A story about that overwhelmed feeling that I think a lot of us have felt.
Look, a very obvious one, as I said, was within the first couple of weeks, having to sit down and go through a couple of PhDs written by people in my area of research, and the volume of work, the standard, the detail was mind-boggling, and I didn't understand everything that I was reading. I mean, to the point where giving up at that point was on the cards. I really had that much self-doubt that I thought it might be better to cut my losses now and not waste my time or anyone else's, and just give up.
So you also mentioned, and I think it relates to that overwhelmed feeling of that imposter sense that you had. Can you expand on that a little bit for me?
Yeah, I hadn't come from a research background particularly. I certainly had spent time reading literature, but not in the field directly related to my PhD in my previous work. I'd done, obviously, some research previously to allow me to enrol in a PhD, but certainly not to that standard. And I wondered whether I'd reached my ceiling earlier, and perhaps I wasn't cut out for a PhD, or even had the intellect to do it, the willpower. And so I wondered if people had misjudged me, and that really I wasn't who they thought I was.
So when that started to lift again for you, and you started to feel a little bit more confident, can you just talk to me around that scenario?
So it was probably 18 months to 2 years in. I can't remember the exact time. I'd done some data collection. As part of my research, we needed to look at that data and just make sure that the study was progressing as it should, was viable, that the data I was collecting was appropriate. And I received encouraging feedback from my supervisors at that time. In fact, it was the first time I felt that they were enthusiastic about the study, and that, coupled with the fact that I'd got my head around the literature by that stage, flicked a switch and made me realise that this was something I could do, and that if I just continued with the work that I'd been doing, it could become a reality.
So looking back now that you're just about at the end of your candidature, your thesis has been written up, it's out for review. Looking back now at your journey, how do you feel about it now, looking back on the other side?
It's one of the toughest things that I've done, and I think for me, it's the fact that it seemed often a very lonely journey. I think the biggest battle is battling the demons in your head, telling you you're not good enough, that this is something that's beyond you, questioning whether you have the intellect, the willpower to continue. Many days where you actually didn't do anything. I was in a funk and it just couldn't bring myself to switch on the computer and start working. But I think getting to the end, I think my advice to people would be just, if it's something that you have as a goal, then and you've enrolled and been accepted, then you can do it, but it won't be an easy road.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
As you can see from David's responses, the data is rich and profound. Using a hermeneutic phenomenological lens, 4 distinct themes emerged. I would also note here that for the purpose of this mini case study, I have pulled out single words or phrases from the data, where in reality full chunks of verbatim would be used for analysis. The first emergent theme is existential anxiety. The significant statements here were overwhelmed and panic. The interpretation of these statements indicate a profound sense of existential anxiety upon entering the PhD program. David felt engulfed by the new demands and expectations, leading to panic. The philosophical reflection is that anxiety can be understood through Heidegger's concept of being thrown into a situation where one feels unprepared and exposed to the unknown. The second theme that emerged was fear and internal conflict. The significant statements here were fear of failure and battling the demons in my head. The interpretation is that David's fear of failure and internal battles suggest an ongoing existential conflict. These experiences revealed the internal struggle between self-perception and external expectations. The philosophical reflection can be examined through Kierkegaard's concept of despair, where the participant wrestles with the despair of not meeting perceived standards. Our third theme that emerged was isolation. The significant statements were lonely and misjudged by people, that is, the academic staff who enrolled him. The interpretation of these statements highlight feelings of isolation and misunderstanding. David felt disconnected from others and doubted the judgment of those who accepted him into the program. The philosophical reflection is that this sense of isolation can be related to Heidegger's notion of being with, emphasizing the participants' struggle to find a sense of belonging and acceptance within the academic community. The fourth emergent theme was identity crisis. The significant statements here was imposter, self-doubt, and not enough intellect or willpower. The interpretation was that these statements reflect an identity crisis where David questioned his worth and capability. The feeling of being an imposter revealed a deep-seated insecurity about belonging in the academic world. The philosophical reflection of this theme aligns with Sartre's idea of bad faith, where the participants struggle with the authenticity of their identity and abilities. Now when we look at the same data through a temporal or narrative lens, we find 3 themes that are linked together to tell David's PhD journey. The first theme is into the void and entry into the unknown. The plot point here is that David described the initial excitement and then subsequent feelings of being overwhelmed and experiencing panic upon starting the PhD program. The narrative tone shifts from excitement to anxiety and fear as he entered the new academic environment. The metaphor into the void suggests a leap into an unknown and potentially frightening space. Our next theme is in the void. Firstly, isolation and misjudgment. Here the plot points are when David talked about feeling lonely and misjudged by people, adding to the sense of isolation. The setting is the university environment, and it is portrayed as a place where David felt disconnected and misunderstood. The narrative tone here is one of isolation and misunderstanding. Secondly, we see David struggle with identity. The plot point here is where David experiences his imposter syndrome, self-doubt, and feeling not enough intellect or willpower. The characters are the academic staff and peers, and they're seen as potential judges of David's ability, contributing to his feelings of inadequacy. The central conflict revolves around David's internal struggle with his identity and capability. The metaphor is David battling the demons in his head, indicating an ongoing internal struggle. Our third theme is out of the void, or emerging from the struggle. The plot point here is the small moments of insight, coping, and small victories that can be interpreted as steps out of the void. There are moments of conflict resolution where David describes overcoming challenges or gaining a better understanding of his own capabilities. The narrative tone shifts towards hope, resilience, and acceptance that would be indicative of moving out of the void. 3 sub-themes also emerged from the data when it was analysing using narrative phenomenology. They were resilience, determination, and victory. This theme developed from David's interpretation of his journey through his phrase, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done." David traversed through the void into victory through completion of his studies, through determination and resilience. As a novice researcher, comparing hermeneutic phenomenology and narrative phenomenology for studying the struggle of a PhD student with imposter syndrome was driven by the need to fully understand the depth and the narrative progression of each methodology. They offer distinct but complementary insights. Hermeneutic phenomenology is rooted in the philosophy of interpreting the meanings of lived experiences. This approach was chosen to engage with the essence of David's internal struggles with imposter syndrome. Unlike straight phenomenology, which focuses on describing experiences as they are perceived, hermeneutic phenomenology involves an interpretive process. This interpretive process is akin to peeling back additional metaphorical layers of an onion, revealing the underlying emotions and psychological dynamics that might not be immediately apparent through mere description. Hermeneutic phenomenology moves beyond describing the surface level of experiences to uncover deeper meanings and insights. This was particularly important for understanding themes like anxiety. For example, rather than just noting that David felt anxious, this approach seeks to understand what that anxiety signifies in the context of his academic and personal life. A metaphorical onion has the following layers: a descriptive layer which captures the raw descriptive accounts of the experiences of the participants, an interpretive layer which delves into the meanings behind these descriptions, a contextual layer which explores how academic culture and societal expectations shaped the experiences. Relational layer examines the role of relationships with peers, mentors, and family. A temporal layer considers the evolution of their imposter syndrome over time. An existential layer investigating how David's struggle affected his sense of identity and purpose. an ethical or moral layer, which looks into any ethical dilemmas or considerations that may be faced. And then finally, a reflective layer. And this is the opportunity for the researcher to reflect on how the interpretation may be influenced by your own experiences and biases. By peeling back these additional metaphorical layers, hermeneutic phenomenology offers a comprehensive and profound understanding of the lived experiences of individuals, capturing the complexity and richness of their life worlds. Narrative phenomenology focuses on the stories individuals tell about their experiences, capturing the temporal and transformative aspects of their journeys. This approach was selected to map the progression of David's struggles and his path to overcoming imposter syndrome. Narrative phenomenology allowed for the exploration of David's experiences as unfolding stories, or the weaving of a tapestry where each thread represents a different layer of narrative, and together these threads come together to create a complex picture of David's experiences. By highlighting David's journey through different phases, the themes into the void, in the void, and out of the void, along with the sub-themes, illustrated the dynamic nature of his experiences. This approach provided a broader, more holistic perspective on how he navigated his struggles over time. Now, looking more closely at our tapestry illustration, where the threads come together to create a story. There are base threads, which is the descriptive layer. These base threads form the foundation of the tapestry, and they represent the basic storyline and factual details of the participant's experience. Next, we have the pattern thread, or the interpretive layer. These threads add patterns and designs to the tapestry, representing how participants construct and convey meaning in their stories. This involves analysing narrative techniques such as the use of metaphors, plots, and character development, which add depth and complexity to the narrative. Thirdly, we have the background threads, or the contextual layer. These set the scene, representing the broader social, cultural, and historical context influencing the narratives. Next, we have the relational thread. These threads represent the relationships and the social interactions within the narrative. They weave connections between the characters, illustrating how interactions with peers or mentors and family members influenced our participants' experiences and storytelling. Now we have the time thread, which is a temporal layer, and this runs through the entire tapestry, representing the temporal aspect of the narrative. It illustrates the chronological order and the progression of the story, highlighting how the participants' experiences and perceptions evolved over time. We have the core thread, which is the existential layer. The core thread adds depth and richness, representing the existential questions addressed within the narrative. These threads explore issues related to identity and purpose and meaning in life. Next is the moral thread, and these threads add ethical and moral dimensions to the tapestry. They represent how participants portray and resolve ethical dilemmas. And lastly, we have the reflective thread, which runs through the entire tapestry, representing the narrative process itself. It considers the researcher's role and the interaction between the researcher and the participants, reflecting on how the act of storytelling influences the narrative. So in summary, both methodologies offer valuable insights, but the choice depends on whether the research aims for a deep, interpretive analysis of identity and meaning, hermeneutic phenomenology, or an exploration of personal narratives and storytelling, narrative phenomenology. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.